Hello, coming at you from a different location. I don't think I've ever done that before. So just switching up, keeping you on your feet. We're in week 19, 18. Oh, dang it. I guess it's technically week 19, but the Viva's week 18. I'm so ready to be done. I'm so Vivas are fine. I love the Vivas this semester, but just in general, just so done. So we're gonna be answering the question, what were the implications of World War II? Also, my hair is a wreck. Have not washed it. I look like I've been living in the post-war World War II streets and I haven't had access to a shower. Anyway, we're just gonna roll with it. So although we often celebrate the victory of the Allies in World War II, the conclusion was in many ways more disastrous for the winners, such as like Britain and France, who lost their empires, and the Soviet Union, who lost many of its fighting age and working age men. World War II fundamentally remade the world, leading to the rise of a period of American cultural and political dominance. So first point, we're gonna continue to talk about how the war ended European dominance. We're gonna talk about technological, social, and cultural change, and then we're gonna talk about the rise of conflict between the Soviet Union and the U.S. So, let's get into the first point. The end of Europe's dominance. World War II killed 70 or 85 million casualties, depending on what records you're looking at. But still, that's like 85 million is a lot of people that died. And this really affects the world, obviously. When a lot of people die at once, your population changes and has a big impact on the population of the different countries in Europe and in Asia and in America, but mostly Europe. And this ends European dominance because after the war, Europe really focuses on rebuilding Europe. They have to, and they also don't really have the manpower to keep growing their empires and to keep like colonizing at the rate that they were going before. In the Soviet Union and in China, there was the most deaths, and in the Soviet Union, between casualties, the soldiers, and the civilians, there was about 24 million, a little less than 24 million people that died. So that's a lot of people. And we kind of talked about this looking at the impacts of World War I and how Europe was kind of like slowly going down in its world dominance, and World War II just kind of cements this fall of the domination that Europe had. And from the Office of Historians in the State Department, I have a quote. It says, between 1945 and 1960, 36 new states in Asia and Africa achieved autonomy or outright independence from their European colonial rulers. So that was my other point. With the decolonization, with the population decrease, people couldn't keep up their empires, and decolonization starts to happen a lot. And we can see this in India, especially, which was British colony. It was the biggest British colony and kind of like Britain's crown jewel of her colonies. And Gandhi worked. He was a lawyer, and he worked really hard to free India and decolonize India. And in 1948, India declares independence, and a little while later, the Muslim part of India, formerly, also splits off from India and becomes Pakistan. So Gandhi works really hard for independence and autonomy, and he writes a whole constitution written by the Indian Congress that in a lot of ways mirrors the United States Constitution, which is really interesting. He talks about the inalienable rights of the Indian people and stuff like that, phrases that sound very familiar to the American ears. And basically, he says in this Declaration of Independence that Britain has ruined India economically, politically, culturally, and spiritually. And Gandhi's goal is to take Britain out of the picture and cut ties and give the Indian people full autonomy. So that is the decolonization and the decline of Europe's dominance. Now let's talk about the change that goes on with technology, and food and fashion and all this stuff. There's a lot that I could talk about. I could probably go on, if I was less tired, I could go on for a long time. I'm just gonna kind of whip through this. For technology, we have obviously atomic power. That's a big change. Radars are developed, and DDT, which is an insecticide, is another big technological development. This was developed to kill the mosquitoes, the lice, and the fleas and the flies that were disease carriers and made the soldiers sick. So people in the US work really hard to try to find insecticide that will kill all these bugs, and that's what DDT does. And it gives protection against malaria, typhoid, yellow fever, and it really helps lessen the casualties. And then we also have antibiotics, which were discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928, and these are super helpful when they first come on the scene. Now it's kind of their effectiveness is not the same as it was. But anyway, antibiotics like penicillin help a lot of soldiers not die from their wounds. The time between, Jeremy Bradley says, he talks about how the time between getting battle wound and having a surgery performed or getting medical attention could be as long as 14 hours. And so a lot of people would die of infections in this time period. And so penicillin comes along and it's given to the wounded, and they are spared from dying from their wounds, and it gives more chance for survival. So this is a really good thing that penicillin and antibiotics do. And so yeah, that's kind of the technological changes, the changes in science and medicine that happen. And then we're going to talk a little bit about food and how much our diets are a cause or were affected by World War II. Basically, we have World War II to thank for our obesity. And yeah, thanks a lot. Because we definitely do not have the blame. Wait. I hear something in my ear. Okay, anyway, but yeah. So food, a lot of foods were made specifically for the army. A lot more preservatives were put in the food, in the food. Obviously, you want a soldier's rations to last in heat and in cold and for long periods of time, so they canned a lot of their foods. Actually, Chef Boyardee was a real chef, and he was asked by the army to create canned foods for the military. And his foods were so widely used that soldiers actually would carry can openers around their neck to eat his meals. And he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his contributions for the war effort. So canned foods, and kind of random foods like Cheetos were also a product of the wartime. The McRib. Nicola Twilley says that wartime innovations in blood plasma transport paved the way for instant coffee. The merit is the McRib is descended from military research into fabricated modules of meat, and the finger-staining dust on Cheetos can be traced back to the dehydrated compressed jungle cheese invented by scientists in 1943. So basically, Nicola tells us that a lot of the inventions we have, or the foods we eat today, can go back to World War II. Stuff like M&Ms were made, and they were chocolates with a casing so that they wouldn't melt in the jungle climates that a lot of these soldiers, I'm getting so distracted, a lot of these soldiers were in. And Spam also gained popularity following the war even. Spam was one of the rations that people would receive. I don't even know what Spam is, but I know it's good. And it became an integral part of a lot of traditional foods in places like the Hawaii, the Philippines, and Korea. And yeah, enriched foods, were given to the soldiers to supplement nourishment that they may not have gotten from their processed foods that they were getting. But basically, after the war, we still kind of hold on to all these wartime innovations in food, like the Cheetos and the M&Ms are just small examples, but it's stuff like that gets stocked onto American consumers' shelves post-war that make us fat, expand our waistlines. And another thing that changes is religion. And we can see this through cargo cults, which is super interesting. And the idea behind a cargo cult is that American soldiers or soldiers come into these rural islands that have never seen white people before, and the white people bring a lot of cargo. And so the natives think, how did they get this? This cannot possibly be man-made stuff, so they must have gotten it from a god. And so the natives, islanders, would infer that the way to get cargo would be to do all the rituals that the soldiers were doing, right? The marching, all the drills, the uniforms, all these rituals of the soldiers, the native islanders thought is what got them their cargo. So this is where cargo cults come from. And in the Pacific island of Tanna, cargo cults emerge following the war. And they'll kind of come from this guy named John Frum, who comes to Tanna, the Pacific island of Tanna, in 1940, and he basically promises that Americans will come to the island and will supply the people with things. And 2 years later, when America joins World War II, the Americans do come to Tanna, and so from this, the people of Tana think that the prophecy was fulfilled, so what John Frum said must be true, and they start cargo cults. Yeah, so that's cargo cults, and now let's go to the rising tension between the USA and the Soviet Union. As we all kind of know, because it's very recent in our minds, the Cold War was a time like following World War II that the two leading powers of the world, the USA and the USSR, there's a lot of tension, and there is a nuclear deterrence that happens called the Cold War. William R. Keller explains that the decline of Europe can be seen in the, quote, two agonistic political, socioeconomic, and military blocs, each tied to the power that had liberated the continent from German occupation. And these two political, like really opposing political groups are the capitalism of the USA and then the communism of the USSR. And basically, after World War II, I keep saying basically, I'm sorry. After World War II, a nuclear world order is created. The people with the nukes have the power. That would be the Soviet Union and America, and they rise to power because of their nuclear weapons. The first time we see nuclear weapons used for warfare is in the bombing of Japan, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. I should know how to say this, shame on me. But the two Japanese cities that were bombed, and pilot of the plane that dropped the first bomb, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tibbets, wrote about his experience of seeing the bombs drop and his co-pilot's experience. And he wrote that, "We turned back to look at Hiroshima. The city was hidden by an awful cloud, boiling up, mushrooming." And then Tibbets' co-pilot turned and whispered to Tibbet and said, "My God, what have we done?" So in this, we can kind of see the horror of nuclear warfare. And since that time, the power of nuclear weapons has only increased. For perspective, the bombs that were used prior to August 1945 had about 10 tons of TNT. And the nuclear bombs used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were equal or equivalent to 18,000 tons of TNT. So that is so much more. And even the weaponry, nuclear weaponry that we have today is equal to all of the explosive weaponry used in World War II. So that's a lot of nuclear power. So that we can kind of understand there's going to be a lot of tension between these two states that have more power and weaponry than has ever been had in history. And if they were to use it, they would seriously if they were to use it, they would seriously do more damage than had ever been done in a war before. And this leads us to the theory of, I don't know if it's a theory, I think it is a theory, of nuclear deterrence, which is the idea that you can prevent someone from attacking by kind of threatening an unacceptable consequence. And this happens in the Cold War when nuclear weapons lead to a nuclear deterrence. Both the USA and the USSR, I should do USSR and USA because geographically that makes more sense. But they both have a lot of different nuclear weapons. They have nuclear weapons in the air with the bombers. Then they have the land or the underground ones with the ICBMs, and then they have the water ones, the underwater ones, that submarine IBMs, so SIBMs. And these nuclear delivery, like weapon delivery systems, both had all of these. And if one of these powers were to fire at the other one, the other power would obviously retaliate. They'd send their bombers, they'd send their ICBMs. I think it's ICBMs actually. They send their ICBMs, they send their SIBMs, they'd send all of that, and this would go back and forth, right? And the end result would probably be and would have the prospect to destroy both states. That is so much destruction, and so this leads to mutual assured destruction, MAD, or MAD. So yeah, this is a lot of rising tension from the nuclear weapons that we see post-World War, but the implications of World War II were that they led to the decline of European dominance. They made a lot of social, cultural, and technological changes to the world, and they led to a rise in tension between the USSR, or the Soviet Union, I should say, and the USA. Thanks for listening. I am super spazzy right now, so I'm sorry. I need to run. Guys, I hope you're not dead. Hang in there. You're gonna get through this week, this month. You got this. Go you. I need to wash my hair, so I better go. Bye.